Hello and welcome to the Only iPhones channel, where all we discuss on this channel is everything iPhone. And I wanted to jump in on this subject and make an iPhone 13 Pro Max pros and cons video because while this phone is probably the most perfect iPhone that Apple has ever made, there are a few things that some people might be bothered by. So I want to cover that in today's video while also shining a light on some of the best features of this phone. So without further ado, let's get into the pros and cons of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Now, the first and foremost thing that I love about this phone being my daily use phone is the incredible battery life. The battery life on this phone will easily last you 2 days with most users unless you're heavily filming or doing a lot of FaceTime calls, anything that takes a lot of battery. But if you're just using your phone for a few phone calls here and there, browsing some social media, looking at some things on the web, the calculator, checking the weather, this is going to last you 2 days pretty much all the time. I probably only charge this phone about 3 or 4 nights out of the week. And we're starting off with the pros of this phone because I always love starting things on a positive note, and later on in the video we'll get to the few cons that I have. Next thing, the display on this phone is absolutely gorgeous if you can't tell by looking at it in the video here, which is being shot on the iPhone 10 by the way, so kudos to the iPhone 10 still looking this good after all these years. And you can see just how much the colors pop on this device. And when you open up the Photos app and look at some of the photos here, the colors and the images here are just absolutely vibrant and amazing looking. This phone takes by far the best photos of any iPhone I've ever seen, and I love using this as my regular camera. And speaking of this being my regular camera, that jumps me right into my next pro of this phone. I absolutely love the macro photography on this phone. This feature on the iPhone 13 Pro Max has completely solved the problem that many iPhone users were having with their device of zooming in too close on a subject and then the image turning out blurry no matter how much they tried to manually focus. The macro photography fixes that. Look how much detail you can see in the interior of this flower here. Same thing with this one. Look at how vibrant this flower looks and just how much detail you can see up close on it, all taken with the macro photography. So this is by far one of the best features on this phone that I absolutely love, and it's nice that it completely solved the problem that so many iPhone users had prior to the 13th generation. Another thing I love about this phone is when you're using it outside, it does get too hot, just like the iPhone 12 Pro Max did, which was one of my biggest complaints about the iPhone 12 Pro Max. However, when this phone dims, let's say it gets down to about here or so, when it gets too hot, it doesn't dim quite as much as the iPhone 12 Pro Max did. And the other thing is the recovery time that it takes for the phone to go back to full brightness like this is only maybe a couple of minutes. Whereas the iPhone 12 Pro Max literally would take at least 10 to 15 minutes to come back to this full brightness. It really had a hard time recovering, and if you put it back in the heat, it would just go all the way back down to a almost invisible brightness level when you're looking at this thing outside in the sun. Another pro of this phone is the absolutely premium feeling of this device. Overall, it feels like you're holding an $1,100 phone. You don't feel like you're getting gypped when you hold this phone. Just the look and feel of it totally feels like an $1,100 phone, and that includes the weight of the phone because it doesn't feel flimsy. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart. You could just like try to bend this thing as much as you can, and for most people they probably wouldn't even be able to make it budge because it is tough, let me tell you. The next pro of this phone is the excellent night mode photography, which I actually made a whole video about, and I'll leave it down in the description below. So if you want to check out just how good and sometimes how bad the night mode photography can be, go ahead and check out that video. But this is a perfect example of just how beautiful photos can turn out with the night mode on the iPhone 13 Pro Max. Another pro of this phone is that 3x zoom lens. All of the 13 models come with the wide angle and the super wide angle lens, being these two here. However, only the Pro models come with this 3x zoom, and it works out perfectly. This zoom is an amazing zoom lens, and I have used it in so many applications with photo and video, and it does not disappoint, let me tell you. And the next pro of this phone is just how snappy and how fast it is. The apps on this phone just open up at lightning speed, and basically the only thing holding you back is how fast is your Wi-Fi or LTE connection here, because apps launch in a heartbeat. There's literally no delay. They just open right up. As you can see, I'm not having any issues loading anything, and I have never seen any issues either since I've had this device. Now let's get into the cons list, which is, by the way, shorter than my pros list because I just don't think there's that many things wrong with this phone, but the few things that are a little bit of a problem I will mention here. So for some people, they won't like the size or the weight of the phone, because if you have small hands, it's going to be very difficult to use this phone with one hand. If you have small hands, I highly recommend you go and check one out at the Apple Store before you actually buy one, or play around with a friend's first, because it's a pretty big phone. And it's also the heaviest iPhone that Apple makes. If you're just a small person or you just like the small form factor of other iPhones, then this model's probably not going to be for you. You're probably going to want to go with the regular 13, which I think is the perfect size for most people. And that leads me directly into my next con of this device. Because it's so heavy, it actually makes it a little bit easier to drop on accident, because you almost don't expect the phone to be as heavy as it is, and it can actually make it so that you might lose your grip on it because you weren't expecting when you picked it up for it to be that heavy if you're not used to a phone this heavy. And also, this flat edge design that Apple has now since the 12th generation doesn't help either. I actually prefer the rounded edges for the grip purposes anyways, like the iPhone 10. It just makes the phone a little bit easier to hang on to, versus this flat edge design really makes you feel like you got to squeeze the phone more so you don't drop it. Now, another con of this phone is that even though the display is amazing and it is super bright, I wish that it had a mode where the display could get even brighter when you're outside in full sun, because I use my phone a lot outside, and even though this thing does get very bright, as you can see inside, when you're outside facing sunlight, it just still feels like you got to be squinting to see it, especially if you're wearing sunglasses, because you got two things making the phone dim. You got the dimmer screen, and then you got the sunglasses. Obviously, sure, you could take your glasses off, but it would be nice if the phone could just get brighter when you're outside only, because when you're inside, you really don't need it to be any brighter than this. In fact, once it starts getting close to sunset, I always manually turn my brightness down because it just gets too bright when you're inside. But for outside purposes, I do wish it was brighter. Now, another con of this device, the iPhone 13 Pro models, not just the Pro Max, is the lack of cool colors. I'm actually jealous of the iPhone 13 models and all of the cool colors they had. I actually briefly owned just a regular iPhone 13 in the blue color, and I thought that color was so cool looking, and I just wish that they would bring some of those colors over to the Pro designs. I know that they're trying to differentiate the Pro models between the regular 13 models by having their own exclusive colors, but come on, Apple. You should give them some cooler colors than this. I thought that this color was actually a downgrade from the iPhone 12 Pro Max color. In fact, I think that's the only thing I actually miss about my iPhone 12 Pro Max is the cooler color, because I had the Pacific blue one, and now they had this Sierra blue, which a lot of times looks more gray than blue. So guys, that is my pros and cons list of the iPhone 13 Pro Max. If you want to see a nice, simple, practical review on this phone, then go ahead and check out my simple iPhone 13 Pro Max review on the screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you over in the next video.